There are stories that Hollywood produces deliberately, carefully packaged and released on a schedule designed to maximize attention. And then there are the stories that arrive without warning on an ordinary Tuesday morning, that pull back a curtain nobody was expecting to see moved, and that force an uncomfortable reckoning with things the industry would prefer to leave unexamined. The death of James Handy on June 3, 2026, in a quiet residential pocket of Tarzana, Los Angeles, was the second kind of story. It arrived with a 911 call that stopped people cold, a set of circumstances that raised immediate and serious questions about mental illness, household dynamics, and institutional failure, and a response from the entertainment industry that was, in its own way, just as revealing as the tragedy itself. Because James Handy had spent nearly 50 years building one of the most quietly essential careers in the history of American film and television. And when he died, the machine he had served so faithfully for so long produced, in the main, silence. James Handy was born in New York City, and his path into acting began in the late 1970s, during the era when network television was expanding rapidly and daytime soap operas were functioning as the primary training ground for character actors entering Hollywood's broader ecosystem. His early work included appearances connected to the ABC daytime drama Ryan's Hope, a show that launched and developed the careers of numerous working actors during that period. According to his IMDb biography, cited across multiple news outlets covering his death including ABC 7, NBC Los Angeles, and CBS Los Angeles, Handy accumulated more than 100 acting credits across a career that stretched across nearly 5 decades. That number does not appear on marquees. It does not generate the kind of coverage that franchise leads or award season contenders receive. But it represents something that is statistically far rarer than stardom, which is sustained, consistent, professional relevance across multiple generations of an industry that discards most of its participants within a few years of their arrival. What Handy built was a career defined entirely by reliability and range. He was not deployed in roles designed to showcase a particular performer's charisma or to anchor a narrative. He was deployed in the roles that make narratives believable, the authority figures, the institutional professionals, the ordinary men positioned within larger storylines whose presence tells an audience that the world of the film is real. Casting directors returned to him repeatedly across changing production cultures because he delivered exactly what was required without disruption and without ego. That quality is invisible when it works, which is precisely why it works, and it is the reason that actors like Handy are simultaneously essential and overlooked in equal measure. His film credits threaded through productions that became genuinely significant pieces of American popular culture, often in ways nobody could have predicted at the time of filming. In 1990, he appeared in Arachnophobia, directed by Frank Marshall and starring Jeff Daniels, playing Pete, a resident of the small California town at the center of the film's escalating spider infestation narrative. The film has since developed into a cult favorite, repeatedly revisited by horror and dark comedy audiences across generations. A year later, he appeared in The Rocketeer, Disney's adaptation of Dave Stevens' beloved comic book series, set in 1938 Los Angeles and following a stunt pilot who discovers a stolen rocket pack while navigating gangsters and Nazi operatives. The film has earned a devoted following as a piece of superhero history that predated the modern franchise era and demonstrated what the genre could do with period setting and genuine charm. By 1995, his career intersected with one of the decade's most enduring family films when he appeared in Jumanji alongside Robin Williams, Bonnie Hunt, Kirsten Dunst, and Bradley Pierce. He played a police officer, one of the authority figures drawn into the supernatural chaos unleashed by the film's cursed board game. Jumanji did not simply succeed as a film and move on. It became the foundation of a multi-generational franchise that continued producing sequels decades after the original, generating new audiences with each iteration while maintaining the cultural presence of the original cast and production. In 2017, 2 decades after Jumanji, Handy appeared in Logan, James Mangold's final Wolverine film starring Hugh Jackman, a stark and emotionally devastating story set in a near-future America where an aging and physically deteriorating Wolverine attempts to protect a young mutant while confronting his own mortality. Handy played a doctor, a small but tonally appropriate role within a film preoccupied with age, physical decline, and the weight of a life lived in violence. Critics and audiences received Logan as one of the finest superhero films ever made, a film that used the conventions of the genre to say something genuine about mortality and legacy. His most recent major film credit was Top Gun: Maverick, where he appeared as a bartender named Jimmy. The film, produced by and starring Tom Cruise, was released in 2022 following multiple pandemic-related delays and went on to earn over $1.4 billion worldwide, making it one of the highest-grossing films of 2022 and a landmark achievement in legacy sequel filmmaking. Handy's role was brief and functionally atmospheric, the kind of casting that stabilizes the world of a film rather than drives its narrative forward. But Top Gun: Maverick did not fade from cultural circulation the way most blockbusters do. Its extended life cycle through streaming platforms, award season recognition, and ongoing franchise discussions kept its entire cast list in public circulation far longer than typical. When news of Handy's death broke in June 2026, that credit became one of the most widely cited reference points in global reporting, according to coverage across ABC 7, NBC Los Angeles, CBS Los Angeles, and international outlets. Not because the role defined his career, but because the film it connected him to remained actively present in the cultural conversation. Before any of those screen credits existed, James Handy had lived through something that shaped everything that followed in ways the entertainment press rarely examined in any depth. He served in the United States Army during the Vietnam War, deployed with the 196th Light Infantry Brigade to Tay Ninh Province between August 1966 and July 1967, according to his documented biography. This was a period of intense ground combat operations during the broader escalation of American military involvement in Southeast Asia. In interviews conducted across his career, Handy described the experience in terms that made clear how permanently it had marked him. He spoke about sustained combat conditions that stretched across weeks in the field, about the sensory disorientation of dense jungle terrain and near-total darkness, about the constant uncertainty of proximity to enemy positions, and about witnessing fellow soldiers killed or injured at close range. The war did not recede into background detail after he returned home. It actively reshaped his worldview and his moral framework. He later identified as a pacifist, stating that his time in combat had led him to believe the war had caused unnecessary suffering without meaningful justification. That personal history gave his long run of authority figures and institutional roles a foundation that most viewers never knew was there. Sheriffs, officers, government professionals, men operating within systems of power, these were the roles Handy inhabited across shows including NYPD Blue, ER, The West Wing, The X-Files, Criminal Minds, and Alias, where he played the recurring character Arthur Devlin across multiple episodes. He was also, notably, a vocal critic of the way Hollywood depicted the Vietnam experience on screen. He expressed consistent discomfort throughout his career with stylized or simplified portrayals of combat, arguing that many popular films failed to honestly represent the psychological and moral complexity of what soldiers had actually experienced. He was particularly critical of Forrest Gump, arguing that its depiction of Vietnam-era service softened and distorted a historical reality he had lived through personally. Those were not the comments of a man performing veteran identity for professional benefit. They were the comments of someone for whom the experience remained genuinely alive and genuinely unresolved. At 81 years old, Handy was living in the Tarzana neighborhood of Los Angeles with his longtime partner, Wendy Gledhill. According to police accounts reported by NBC Los Angeles and CBS Los Angeles, Wendy's adult son, Michael Gledhill, also lived in the residence. On the morning of June 3, 2026, at approximately 9:30, a 911 call came through to the Los Angeles Police Department. The caller's words, as reported by law enforcement officials and confirmed across ABC 7, NBC Los Angeles, and CBS Los Angeles, were precise and immediately alarming. He stated that he was the Son of Man and that he had just killed the Man of Sin. When LAPD officers arrived at the Irwin Street property minutes later, they found James Handy in the front yard, unresponsive, suffering from a stab wound to his chest. Emergency responders began life-saving efforts immediately and transported him to a nearby hospital. Despite those efforts, he was later pronounced dead. According to ABC 7, Ring camera footage obtained by TMZ showed the suspect, 44-year-old Michael Gledhill, walking calmly along the sidewalk in front of neighboring properties in the immediate aftermath of the stabbing, with police helicopters circling overhead. When officers arrived, Gledhill flagged them down himself and told them directly that he was the person they were looking for. He was arrested and transported to Van Nuys Jail, with bail set at $2 million. By Friday of that same week, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office had formally charged Gledhill with one count of murder and a special allegation of personal use of a deadly weapon, identified as a knife, according to the DA's official press release. The case was assigned to Deputy District Attorney George Morris of the Family Violence Division and remained under active investigation by the LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division. Gledhill did not appear at his initial arraignment in Los Angeles Superior Court, and no plea was entered. His attorney informed the court that jail authorities had not transported him to the proceedings. According to ABC7's reporting, Superior Court Judge John H. Reed responded by ordering that Gledhill be evaluated through mental health court mechanisms to determine his competency to stand trial. If convicted as charged, he faces a sentence of 26 years to life in state prison, according to NBC Los Angeles. Wendy Gledhill later disclosed, according to reporting in the reference documentation of the case, that her son had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had discontinued his medication shortly before the incident. That detail became central to understanding the broader clinical context surrounding the tragedy. Mental health professionals are consistent and careful in drawing a distinction that tends to be lost in media coverage of cases like this one. The National Institute of Mental Health and the MacArthur Violence Risk Assessment Study have both demonstrated through large-scale research that schizophrenia itself does not predict violence. The overwhelming majority of people living with schizophrenia are not violent and are statistically more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. Where elevated risk does occur, researchers have identified a specific cluster of contributing conditions, including untreated psychosis, paranoid ideation, social isolation, and the absence of consistent external support, particularly when these factors converge inside a shared living environment with limited outside intervention and monitoring. Clinical psychiatrist Dr. Ronald W. Pies has written that delusions are fixed false beliefs held with extraordinary conviction despite clear contradicting evidence, and that in acute psychotic episodes those beliefs can become tightly fused with perceived moral or cosmic narratives. The language Gledhill used during the 911 call drew on biblical imagery, combining phrases from different parts of Scripture in a way that does not constitute standard theological language. Forensic psychologists and law enforcement investigators do not interpret such language at face value. It is treated as one piece of behavioral evidence among many, placed alongside physical evidence, relationship history, witness accounts, and the documented mental health background of the individual involved. Criminologist James D. Densley, who studies violent domestic environments, has noted that escalation in these settings is rarely linear and is often the product of accumulating stressors interacting with untreated mental health conditions inside closed systems with limited external interruption. Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman addressed Handy's death directly in a public statement quoted by ABC7 and CBS Los Angeles. He said that this was not how anyone's life should end, stabbed in the chest and left dying in the front yard of a home, and that Handy had deserved to live out his later years enjoying what he had worked so hard for and enjoying it with those he loved and cared about. That statement from the district attorney raised a question that the entertainment industry itself largely left unanswered in the days and weeks that followed. Who was James Handy, and what had those nearly 50 years of work actually meant? The industry's response to his death was, by most honest measures, muted. There were no immediate high-profile tributes from major stars. There were no prime-time memorial segments or industry-wide moments of acknowledgement proportional to the length and consistency of his contribution. Reporting from ABC7, NBC Los Angeles, CBS Los Angeles, and TMZ documented the facts of the case with professionalism and genuine care. But the broader entertainment apparatus, the studios and streaming platforms and production companies that had benefited from Handy's reliability across 5 decades of changing production culture, produced the kind of subdued response that has become entirely characteristic of how Hollywood treats working character actors when they are no longer available to be used. This is the structural truth that cases like James Handy's make visible whether the industry wants them to or not. Films like Jumanji, Top Gun, Maverick, Logan, and Arachnophobia are not held together only by their leading performers. They are held together by the accumulated labor of hundreds of actors whose names do not appear in opening credits but whose presence makes every scene believable, every world inhabitable, every story real. When those actors are alive and available, they are booked steadily, valued practically, and quietly essential. When they are gone, the silence that tends to follow says something about which lives and which careers the industry considers worth publicly mourning, and which it considers simply part of the operational background of making entertainment. James Handy spent nearly 50 years being part of that background with complete professionalism and without complaint. He brought to his work the discipline of a man who had survived combat in one of the most traumatic and morally complex conflicts in American history. He brought the craft of someone who had studied his profession seriously and understood that the job of a supporting actor is not to draw attention but to make the larger work better. He brought the integrity of a person who, when he disagreed with something, said so plainly and on the record, regardless of whether it was professionally convenient. He was 81 years old, living quietly in Tarzana with the woman he cared about, when a situation inside a household carrying enormous emotional and psychiatric weight reached a point of rupture that nobody could walk back from. The district attorney was right. That is not how anyone's life should end. The least that can be done now is to say his name clearly, account for what he built honestly, and refuse to let the quiet that followed his death be the final word on who he was and what he spent 50 years contributing to an industry that relied on him far more than it has yet been willing to say.